Hello, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the Six of Crows series, or, well, two-book series. It's by Leigh Bardugo. The first book is Six of Crows, and this is set in the same general world as the Grisha Verse. However, it is in a different country with a totally different feel to it. It does not take place at the same time as the Grisha Verse series, and it does not involve any of the same characters or even remotely the same storyline. So basically, the only thing that really carries over is the Grishas, which, like I talked about in the Grisha Verse, they're basically elemental magicians. They can control, your heart or the wind or flames or, sunlight or darkness, that sort of a thing. So this is story-wise kind of like if Ocean's 11 was set in Prohibition, New York, and there were magicians. This is a heist book, a heist series, and it is six misfits who have to go on this incredible, impossible to pull off heist, basically to save the world from collapsing. The book starts out in Ketterdam, which is the capital city of this island nation, and it is filled with brothels and gambling dens and mobsters, basically. I mean, they don't call them that, but mobsters, for lack of a better term. And you follow along these characters as they are the outcasts of society. They have to coalesce into a group and pull off this heist. So the pacing of these is a little bit more deliberate. You get people slowly introduced, slowly revealed. A lot of their backstory is kept secret, so you're not quite sure what their motivation is or where they're coming from for a lot of this stuff. The main character who is planning the heist doesn't really reveal his plans very quickly, and so you never quite know where they're going with it. So it's a little bit more of a deliberate, measured pace. However, there is, at least for me, I found the mystery of who are these people? What are they doing? How do they know each other? Wanting to know what was going on with the people kept me wanting to read. So there is a lot of description. The world is very vividly described, and the author, I feel, does a great job of that without making it super densely written. There are multiple plot lines. Different chapters follow different characters. So they may not all be in the same spot, especially during the actual heist. So you'll get, you'll be following one character right up until something major happens, and then you'll leave off not knowing how their little cliffhanger ends, and then you start following another character at the other end of, the building they're trying to steal from, and they'll get up right up until they find themselves in a pickle, and then you start following another character. So while these are not, the pacing of this is more measured, the author does a great job of making you really want to keep reading to find out what's going to happen to these characters. The characters are really, really well developed. And like I said, the author does a great job of only revealing pieces in little tidbits of what's going on with the different characters, what their actual motivation is, what they're even really after, because not all of them are, have the same goals with this heist. And not only do you get some great character development, but you get it in a way that's like dangling a cheese in front of a mouse. You're like, oh, but wait a minute, why is this? You don't know yet. Now you're going to have to keep reading to find that out. The characters are a little eccentric. You have, Grisha healer. You have this former acrobat woman who throws knives and is like the bodyguard for the main character, who is a somewhat higher up in the mafia and runs a gambling den. So they're eccentric characters, but you find yourself really identifying with them because they're so well drawn, they're so well developed, and you really understand why they're doing the things that they're doing. They've been put in impossible situations and are just trying to survive. So the author does a really good job of that, because these are people that obviously I don't actually identify with someone who has magical powers or is an acrobat or anything like that. Yet I absolutely understood where the person was coming from and why they were doing what they were doing. So the storyline for these books is the collection of the crew, introducing who everybody is and in the part they're going to play, the actual heist, or the planning of the heist, then the actual heist, then the aftermath of it. And the books are really full of plot twists. The main character really keeps stuff close to the vest, so he doesn't necessarily tell his crew exactly all that's going on, and you don't necessarily know where everybody else on the crew is, what their main goal is, if they can be trusted or not. So these books, I want to touch on something really quickly. These books don't focus on per se, but deal with some pretty heavy issues. The two main issues that I'm thinking of are slave trade and human trafficking. At least one of the characters was kidnapped and traded as a slave into human trafficking. And that's how she gets into this country. I believe there was actually another one who was also captured and traded as a slave, but I can't remember for sure. So if these are things that you are not comfortable reading about or are not comfortable with your young adult reading about, then it's pretty interwoven into the book. It's not something that would be easily just skipped over. And I'm not saying that these things should be skipped over. It is something to keep in mind if you're looking at the book for your kids. I don't know your kids, and I don't know their temperament, and I don't know the conversations you had with them about the dark evilness that happens out in the world. So this may or may not be something you're comfortable with them reading about. So I just wanted to warn you that those subjects are covered in these books. And props to the author for not shying away from that sort of thing. But it is something to be aware of because it's definitely not for everybody to read. The storyline really focuses on the cleverness of the characters and how they work with one another to deal with the situations that arise. I really like stories where, like Ocean's 11, or if you've ever watched the show Leverage, where you're just not sure how the person is going to outcon the system or the bad guy or whoever. And these books are really great at that. I mean, it is a giant heist book. So if you enjoy the cleverness, these whole books hinge on that. So they have a really complex storyline because you've got so many balls in the air at the same time. You don't quite know what everybody's got planned for each other, for themselves. And it's interesting all the way to the very end. The frame and tone of these books is really bittersweet. All of the characters have ended up where they are through some really horrific tragedies, like the character who was traded into human trafficking. Or I don't want to reveal anybody else's backstory because, that's part of the joy of reading it. But they are literally all there through horrible, horrible tragedies that they have survived, which gives the tone of the book kind of a darker feel, a little bit bleak. but at the same time heartwarming because they are all learning to trust each other and how to put the past in the past and move on. So these are bittersweet books, kind of a little bit darker, but with some heartwarming moments sprinkled in so that it is not all bleak and darkness. And then some good suspense because you have no idea how they're going to pull off the thing that they need to pull off. And like I said, you'll be following one character up until they find themselves in a giant pickle, and then it cuts off and starts following someone else. So you're left in suspense about what happened to the other character. And it was done beautifully. I spent the entire time going, oh no, only a couple more chapters before I go to bed. And then you're like, well, now I don't know how things end with this other person, so I need to read a couple more chapters. And then, it's 2 a.m. and you're basically done with the book. And I loved these books. There's only 2 books, so it's a super quick read. If you just want something to take on vacation or, read while you're on the bus on the way to work or whatever, super easy to just knock the 2 of them out. It is not necessary to read the Grisha Verse series first. However, because really the only overlap between the 2 is knowing that people are there in Ketterdam because they're refugees from the war that was going on during the Grisha Verse. And because it introduces the Grisha and kind of explains them. So if you've watched my other video on the Grisha Verse, honestly, that's the extent of what you need to know to be able to read these books. So if you are planning on reading both, then definitely read the Grisha Verse first because that's the order that they go in. But if you're not interested in the Grisha Verse, but this sounds way more interesting, you don't need to read the Grisha Verse for this to make sense. I did do these on audiobook, these 2 books, and they were good. They were solid. If that's your preference, I can recommend the audiobook. The narrator did a great job. So that was the Six of Crows series by Leigh Bardugo. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content, make sure to subscribe before you leave. All right, until next time, happy reading.